There's nothing less cool than the United Nations. Bureaucrats, diplomats, meetings, taxes, boring. But the UN knows its power lies in its mystique, that the UN is about something idealistic, a hope for humanity, like the Star Trek movie vibe, as opposed to the reality of dictatorships and corruption. So the UN places an emphasis on reaching out to kids, as all left-wingers do. Even when I was in high school, the United Nations was sponsoring student clubs and student trips, all in an attempt to recruit advocates for the rest of their lives. It's so square, it reminds me of this clip of Steve Buscemi on the show 30 Rock. Did you ever see this?
I was part of a special task force of very young-looking cops who infiltrated high schools. How do you do, fellow kids?
What?
How do you do, fellow kids? That's exactly what the United Nations is like. Here, take a look. The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. I mean, right there, any normal human being would doze off, especially any kids. Well, this UN Global Warming Department, they're having what they call a global youth video competition on climate change. That's what it's called. They're offering cash and a free trip to Paris. Here's how they pitch it on their website. Quote, if you are between the ages of 18 and 30, we want to hear about your inspiring actions. Think about a project or a campaign you're involved in to combat climate change, an action which convinced your parents, school, or college to take climate action, a lobbying of your elected members of parliament or your city leaders. Whatever is making a difference, turn it into a snappy, concise 3-minute video and join the competition. Now, of course, if you're 30, you're not really a youth. You're like that Steve Buscemi character, but this isn't really journalism either. It's journalism UN style, paying young people to be propagandists, to lobby their own parents. What kind of creepy instruction is that from the UN? I mean, even lobbying elected members of parliament. Where does an unelected foreign entity like the UN get off telling Canadian citizens or citizens of any country to lobby their elected officials to do the bidding of a foreign unelected bureaucrat? Isn't the UN supposed to do what its member countries tell it to do? Since when does the UN tell its member countries what to do? Well, since it was taken over by corrupt activists and dictatorships, of course. But look at the guidelines for the propaganda video. Look at what the UN is instructing young people to do. Here, I'm quoting again. The UN is telling people what they should put on film. Here, and I quote, "You have prevented new fossil fuel infrastructure. You have organized a successful divestment campaign." Say what? The UN is telling Canadian young people to film themselves stopping new, fossil fuel infrastructure, blocking an oil tanker, blocking a pipeline, or drilling rigs. This is UN policy now. They're rewarding people for doing this civil disobedience. Say, I noticed the webpage here is in English, of course. Does the UN also have this webpage in Arabic to tell young people in OPEC countries like Saudi Arabia to fight against their country's pipelines, or to have a successful divestment campaign? That means to pressure an institution like a university endowment fund to sell off its oil and gas stocks. This is what the UN is doing, advising Western students to attack non-OPEC oil and gas industries. Of course, because it's the UN and it's pumping money into anti-industry activism, but only against Western ethical oil companies. The UN would never, has never, attacked OPEC oil because they're the UN. Hey, why are we still a member of this corrupt organization again? For TheRebel.media, I'm Ezra Levant.